I'm going to share with you some of my favourite drills for improving distance control or speed control in putting, which ultimately will help you to reduce your score by eliminating 3 putts and helping your ball to finish closer to the hole when you're on the green. The first game I'm going to share with you is called the ladder drill. If we take a look from down the line here, you'll see how I've set this drill up. I've taken 3 paces towards the green from my ball, and I've placed 1 stick on the ground. The orange stick closest to me is about 3 paces away, and then I've taken a further 3 paces and placed a second stick on the ground. What that's really done is built a little space or an area for me to putt into. You wouldn't necessarily need to put the sticks on the ground. I'm really using those for visual purposes so that you can see them clearly on the camera. You could just put down a T-peg or something simple to build out a space that you're putting to. And then the aim of this game is to putt the ball into the area as close as possible to the beginning of that section, and then to hit subsequent putts further each time. And the goal is to see how many balls you can successfully get beyond the previous ball, but without running out of space at the end of the section. This is developing the skill of touch and feel on the short to mid-range putts, which is extremely important and often overlooked. Sometimes people think that 3-putting is only something that happens on long putts, but I've seen all too often amateur golfers 3-putt from very short distance because they're not able to control their speed on these short to mid-length putts. Equally, if you want to hole more of these short to mid-length putts, you want the capture speed of your ball, the speed your ball is rolling at when it reaches the hole, to be such that if the ball grabs a part of the hole, it's got a chance of going in. Equally, if it doesn't go to the hole, it's also going to stop close to the hole. So distance control on these short to mid putts is equally as important as it is on the long putts. So how do I do this game? Well, I'm going to take my setup and I'm going to go ahead and hit this first putt. And as I say, I'm just trying to get it to reach the front or the beginning of the section there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit my ball. And where that ball rolls out to is where I'm going to mark it. Now, either with a coin, if you have a ball marker, or in this instance, I'm just going to use the T-peg. I'm just going to push the tee into the ground, retrieve the ball and come back to my starting point. And I've already used a lot more of the section there than I would probably like to. This game might look relatively easy in terms of concept, but actually when you come to try and do this, you may notice that your speed needs a lot more attention and a lot more work than you thought it did. So now my second or subsequent putt is supposed to go beyond that first ball, or the T-peg in this instance. I have to hit it past the T-peg, but again, I don't want to hit it too far past, so I really need to have a good sensitivity in my stroke and in my hands as to how hard to hit this putt. It's possible that that ball's gone exactly the same distance. I'm going to say, for the purpose of this drill, it's gone just a tiny bit further, and so I would pick up my tee, mark the ball and come back. Had that ball not reached the target, that would be the end of the game immediately. So the game ends when my putt doesn't reach the previous putt, or it goes beyond the end of the end section. So I've either got to keep getting it progressively further until such time as I can't fit another ball in, or I fail at getting past the previous ball, or I hit it outside of the target. Let's go again. Certainly made sure I hit that one a little harder, but it's gone so much further that now I've got to move this tee all the way up to where the ball is, and I'm fast running out of space. I've only hit 3 putts. A good score here would be to get north of 6 or 7 putts. If you can get somewhere 10 plus, you're doing extremely well. And as I say, we would keep going here, developing the touch and developing the feel each time you putt to hit the ball just that little bit further. Again, much further this time. It's going to almost reach the end of the section. So I've only managed to successfully complete 4 putts, and now I've got a very small space here left to keep playing this game. The more you play it, the better your touch and feel will become. You'll develop a much better sensitivity for how hard to swing, and you'll get more sensitive to different green speeds. You'll be able to start adjusting accordingly when you go and play different courses. But this is a great exercise that anybody can do in their practice green, working on improving their ability to keep judging speed. You can see there that the final ball there went outside of the section, so I would have finished the game having completed 4 successful putts. A couple of modifications you can make to this game. You can change the size of the space that you're putting into. You can make it wider, larger or smaller, depending on whether you want to make the drill easier or harder. And you can also reverse this game, so you could actually putt to the furthest part of the zone and then progressively try to hit each putt slightly shorter or closer to you. It's a nice way to mix it up in case the original version of the game gets a little bit repetitive. But it's a really nice one to work through. You may surprise yourself to see how difficult you think this game becomes when you try it. It looks relatively easy, as I said, on the surface, but training this skill is well worth your time, and it's a really fun game to keep setting personal bests and trying to improve as you go. My second favourite drill when it comes to distance control for putting is heads up putting. You may have heard of this concept, or it could be completely brand new to you. Heads up putting, as it sounds, is putting with your head or your eyes up, looking at the target rather than looking at the ball. And the reason that helps so much with speed control is it trains your eyes and gives your brain the information about the target that you're putting to, rather than just simply looking down at the ball or down at the putter. Now, there's versions of this heads up putting that's different for different players, and you can take it to different extremes, levels of extreme if you like. The first place that I would tell everybody to start when it comes to heads up putting is to make the heads up part of this a complete and total part of your practice regime or your practice stroke. Meaning, if I'm putting to the hole just out in front of me here, as I set up to the side of the ball, I'm going to make my practice strokes while looking at the target. And as I do so, and I move my body and I move the putter, I'm getting a sense of how fast to swing this club. I'm going to know for sure that if I was moving this putter too quickly, this would hit the ball too far. And equally, if I was moving this putter too slowly, this wouldn't reach the target. So there's a sense built into me as an athlete and someone who's played golf, and even just as someone who's spent their life throwing and catching balls, you have a sense of distance and how far away something is. Looking at the target while you make your practice swings is just helping you to get a sense of that instinctive touch and feel that all of us have somewhere inside. So that would be the very first place to start. Make the practice swings while looking at the target. Make the rehearsal stroke the one that you think is the right speed. And then as you step into the ball, the next level of this drill would be to take your setup, take your last look at the hole, and you can keep your gaze fixed on the hole as you putt. Really what you're doing as you keep looking at the hole is I'm trying to recreate or repeat the practice swing that I made. And whilst that ball went in the hole, which is always nice, it never fails to impress me when I do this and when I show it to students how much better their distance control becomes, how much better their speed becomes. This is a mid-length putt. You can do this on short putts, very short putts. In fact, there's evidence of high-level professional players who actually look at the hole when they putt as opposed to looking at the ball. So that's the full version of heads-up putting that can really train some exceptional distance control in a very short space of time, because you're tapping into an ability and an instinct sense that you have for the distance that you're trying to hit the putt immediately. If, however, like many golfers, you'd be far too conscious of looking at the target, maybe you'd be too worried about what your playing partners would say when you're looking at the target rather than looking at the ball. If you're too worried about being that person who looks at the target when they putt, the slightly diluted version of this drill would be to still keep the practice stroke heads up putting, looking at the target, but as you set into the ball and you take your final setup, you'd have one last look, and then as your eyes come back to the ball, you'd go ahead and putt. And really what you're trying to do there is I'm trying to recreate and repeat what I was trying to do in the practice swing. I'm trying to take that rehearsal stroke and the feelings that I have in my fingertips and my body that I've produced by doing this practice stroke. And as I go through this motion here of making these practice strokes, I'm taking that sensation in my body and I'm stepping into the ball, and I'm really trying to just recreate that as best as I can. That's a great way to take the benefit of the practice swing into the putt while still retaining that fact that you want to look down at the ball. But as I already said, the real trick here, one of the best parts of this exercise is actually keeping your eyes on the target. You will be surprised, possibly even amazed, at how much better your putting becomes when you focus your gaze on your target and you allow the club to swing back and through. From a speed control point of view, I almost always see an improvement in every single student I give this to. So if you've never tried heads up putting and you're looking to improve your distance control, you must not avoid trying this. You must give this one a try. Quick question for you. Did you know that 80% of your golf ball's direction comes from the club face angle at impact? And it's your wrists that control that angle. If you want to hit straighter shots and add more distance to your game, then check out the link in the description below. And if we wanted to dive a little deeper into the movement and the mechanics of the wrists during the putting stroke, then using the HackMotion wrist sensor really does allow us to do that. And it's interesting to measure the wrists with putting because the movements are so small in putting, it can be very hard to see a few degrees of change. Whereas in the full swing, sometimes some of these wrist movements can be quite obvious, quite large. In the putting stroke, they can be extremely small, not even perceptible to the eye sometimes, and not even feelable sometimes by the player. When we measure what's going on at the wrist level, we can really start to see some patterns. I would say that in terms of improving stroke speed control in your stroke, you would want to look for a fairly even amount of flexion extension through the stroke. There are wrists involved in putting. Your wrists are going to be involved in some form or another. The idea of zero wrists in putting just is not a reality. Having said that, minimizing some of that wrist motion can be helpful. And when we putt and measure on HackMotion, we can sometimes see patterns of golfers who excessively flex their lead wrist in the backswing or maybe excessively extend it in the follow through. That's going to cause some issues with speed control of that putter head. There's a number of metrics we can look at. What I would say to you is to start out small, hitting some shorter putts, looking to just see what your patterns and tendencies might be in terms of how you move your wrists throughout the stroke. So we take a look at that putt from flexion extension point of view. I had 13 degrees of extension in my wrist, and when I hit the ball I actually had 16. There was a small change, but it was pretty stable. We look at those wrist graphs and we can see that those lines are reasonably straight. We could dive into more detail there, but what would be really interesting would then be to hit a much longer putt and to see what the tendency or the expectation would be as I try to hit this putt double the distance. And there was a much greater change there in the flexion extension number. First of all, meaning that I started with the same amount of extension, which was 13 degrees. But in this longer putt, as I went back to create more power, I actually needed to flex my wrist almost to flat. You see how the wrist there went right the way down to 2 degrees. And by the time I hit the ball, I'd added more extension. Adding excessive extension to the wrist potentially adds excessive loft to the putter, meaning that you don't get that pure roll every single time. And so the ball might be jumping and bouncing in that initial part of its journey, and that becomes extremely difficult to control distance. So you'll know and hopefully notice and recognize there should be more of a change in the wrist in the backswing on these longer putts, but how good are you at returning that putter and that wrist back to the same place at impact? I'll have another go, see if I can get that ball to the top of the slope there. We've got a big step in this green. I know I'm going to flex the wrist somewhat going back. I'll see if I can keep the same amount of extension or closer to the same amount of extension at address and at impact. Felt like I hit that one a little bit better. I had similar pattern, 12 degrees of extension at setup, all the way to just 4 degrees of extension, so I didn't quite flatten it as much, and then came back with a little bit more extension than I started with. So that means that as my wrist is coming through, my putter is potentially adding loft. As I say, that's not always going to give me the best strike or the best distance control. One more of those, all the way back. felt like I struck that one pretty nicely. I tried to keep the flexion more in there, and I can see that I did on that one. I was able to adjust the wrist. You probably don't see any difference on the camera. You watch those putts back, you see me hit those putts, and the strokes probably look very, very similar. If you played them back side by side on camera, it'd be very hard to see any difference. But there was certainly a difference in the sensation or the feel off the putter face, particularly for that last one, where I kept more of the same amount of extension or didn't extend my wrist as excessively. I kept the wrist a little bit more stable, would be my description, and the ball came off the putter face much more solidly, much faster. It doesn't really matter which one of these ways you choose. It really comes down to what gives you the outcome that you're looking for, that predictable and consistent outcome from speed. So use HackMotion to measure how you're doing the wrist in your putting stroke. There'll be some interesting patterns for sure, and then we can highlight where you need to work on and what you need to improve in order to master the skill of distance control in putting. I hope you found the video valuable and useful. There's some drills you can take away with you and use immediately next time you're either out on the putting green, or even taking heads up putting with you out onto the golf course next time you play. If you'd like to learn more about the wrists and how to train them for better golf, then make sure you click the link down in the description of this video, which will take you to further wrist training videos with HackMotion.